Well, good morning, everybody. What's today? It's November 16th, 2020. Boy, we're coming up quick on the new year, huh? 2021. And what a time it's been, huh? This last year. I wanted to do a quick follow-up to a video that I just did a couple of days ago on integrity and why is it so lacking. And so before I go into that, if you haven't watched that video, you may want to watch it. That is a one in which I explain and offer a working definition of integrity and some of the challenges that we experience as human beings in being people of integrity. Although we're all very much attracted to people who have integrity, and we're very much attracted to the idea of being people of integrity. And if you're a parent, you're very much attracted to and invested in raising a young man or a young woman of integrity. Those things are clear, they're facts. There's something that everybody agrees to. Um, and so watch that video because in my counseling practice, I introduce this concept to everybody and I become what's called an integrity coach. So if you haven't watched any of my videos before and you don't know who I am, my name is John Solano. I've been a practicing counselor for over 30 years, and I've been a family therapist for the last 10 plus years, working with families in high levels of conflict. Now, again, this whole integrity idea is really called the integrity approach. It's something that I developed back in the 90s as I began to witness what I saw coming was a tidal wave, if you will, an epidemic of an inflated sense of entitlement and indulgence that was beginning to show up in our lives, in our families, in our communities, and in the world. And now, of course, it has permeated everything. So it's a very, very important time in history right now that we all began to consider this idea of integrity and unpackage it more deeply. And that's what that first video did. And this is what I'm going to do today as well. All right. Uh, Now, again, I'm going to go a little deeper into this. And so kind of put on your seatbelts here because I'm going to connect some dots pretty quickly. All right. Um, so again, watching those other videos is really important. So in my previous videos, I talk about kind of the nature of who we are as human beings. In the last video, I talked about the path of integrity. Those two things are going to come into clash, if you will. They're going to clash. And this is basically the reason why we have the little devil and the little angel on our shoulder. And that we're always in some struggle with trying to live out our best self, trying to be people of integrity. Why is that such a struggle? Well, what I have said so many times in my lectures and presentations and in my videos, and this is a tough thing for people to get their head around for some reason. It shouldn't be, because it's reflected in all valid, decent wisdom teachings. And even in psychology to some degree. I mean, you think about it, we're all born as infants. And what does it mean to be infantile? It means to be immature, basically, right? But really, kind of the definition of being an infant or being infantile. I mean, if you were to accuse an adult of being an infant or infantile, that would not be a compliment. If you were to accuse an adolescent of being infantile, that would not be a compliment. It would basically mean three things. And this is what people don't want to embrace, but we must embrace it in order to get a clear picture of what's going on, what the human condition is. Those three components of what it means to be infantile are this: narcissism, egocentricity, and grandiosity. Those three components are deeply embedded in the very nature of who we are. Narcissism, egocentricity, and grandiosity. Narcissism, basically defined, is when somebody loves themselves. You know, this is kind of a label given. I think it's after one of the gods, a Greek, Roman, what have you, Greek god, Narcissist, who looked into a pond, as I recall, and saw his own reflection and fell in love with himself. So essentially, that's this person. This is the person who thinks they're pretty darn special and that there's no one like them, that they're so completely unique, again, and special, that they just love themselves. They're all about themselves. If you haven't noticed, over the last decade, there's been an increased interest in narcissism. Now, I've been following this trend for decades, but you start to see it show up in mainstream media and television, etc. All sorts of different articles written about it now. Is my boss a narcissist? Is my spouse a narcissist? How do I know if I'm dating a narcissist? I mean, there's all sorts of interest in narcissism right now. And some people will accuse people of narcissism, but you must understand from a psychological standpoint, that's a heavy duty label to be a narcissist. What we're mostly witnessing right now are narcissistic features, all right, embedded in or fueling this inflated sense of entitlement and indulgence. So then what you've got is egocentricity. That means that the person thinks that the world revolves around them. The world should revolve around you. People in the world are here to serve you. And so what we begin to get a picture of, if you will, is really that psychological state of that ends up becoming a dictator, if you will, right? A dictator who it feels like they're, if you will, grandiose. So grandiosity is the third one, which is the person thinks they're godlike, that the end all be all, that whatever thoughts or words they speak are beyond contestation, beyond debate, that everyone should receive them as pearls of wisdom and absolute fact and truth. So you have those three things going on together: narcissism, egocentricity, and grandiosity, right? That is the core of the human psyche. That is why we have to grow up. That is why we engage in disciplines. So whether that discipline is going to school, that's every layer of school that we're involved in, all the way from preschool above. I mean, that's when we have to learn how to socialize. In other words, we have to learn how to start thinking about something other than ourselves. Even oftentimes when we're prior to preschool and we're in a home, I mean, we're certainly become more aware of people around us, and this is the beginning of our tribal thinking, that we've become part of a tribe that increases our odds of survival. But still, the tribe is oftentimes focused on me. So it's still very me. And then all of a sudden, you start to socialize, and you start to socialize with other people in tribes, and you realize that, geez, I got to start thinking about something other than myself. So that's all part of human development. That's a natural part of human development. So when I talk about this core constellation of those three kind of, if you will, concepts of the narcissism, grandiosity, egocentricity, that's what's there naturally in a human being, deeply embedded. That's why we have to grow up. That's why we need to be disciplined as we grow up. That's why we constantly should remain in a discipline, because those concepts are always alive and well in the psyche. And they're held in containment. They're contained by a moral foundation. So when we're developing as human beings, everything from our moms and dads, our family, our extended family, our neighborhood, our community, our government, the world is instilling in us, or activating within us, a moral foundation, a moral fabric, if you will. And that moral foundation that is comprised of various virtues, various convictions, like honesty, like responsibility, like integrity. These virtues set up boundaries. So boundaries contain things. right? It also protects us from things. But just to say, in this case, these boundaries contain and temper the narcissism within us. Otherwise, without those boundaries, we run amok. Without a moral foundation, we run amok. It's the moral foundation which really kind of informs our conscience. And so our conscience tells us when we have stepped over the line, when we are out of alignment with our core values. When somebody doesn't have a conscience, or very, very little conscience, and what that means is that those three core concepts of narcissism, egocentricity, and grandiosity are not well contained, right? Then what naturally starts to come forth into the world? Narcissism, egocentricity, and grandiosity. So, think of that moral foundation, that moral fabric, as kind of a dam on one hand that contains those three powerful concepts, those three powerful infantile concepts. It contains them. Not only does it contain them, but it also, what did I say? Tempers them. It reduces them and turns them into something better, something that can be useful in society. All right. So we have that aspect of ourselves, that infantile aspect, those infantile components deeply embedded in our psyche. Okay. Now, on the other hand, we've got a best self, if you will, what we aspire to be, right? What we call our code of honor. These are the things that we strive to embody, positive things, if you will, virtues like faith and hope, optimism, etc. So one of the things that I mentioned in the first video, and that I kind of unpackaged for everybody, was what's the challenge with becoming a person of integrity? Why is integrity so lacking in our society right now? And basically the process of embodying a virtue. So there's a difference between people thinking that they have a virtue. So somebody might say that I stand for respect or love or compassion, and yet they have difficulty living it out. And when are we most called to live it out? Well, kind of when it hits the fan, when things get tough, when we're challenged. Okay. So, that's when we get to see what we're made of. All right. So none of us are perfect. So we're always going to be, to some degree, out of integrity, if you will. But here's the deal. Because none of us are perfect, because we're always in a state of striving for the best of who we are, there needs to be in place a process by which we move a value that we think about into our bodies, that we embody the virtue. The embodiment of a virtue is called conviction. Conviction means with adherence. It means that we're fused. We actually become fused with that virtue. Prior to conviction happening, there is just somebody holds a belief in their head, and so they're not yet fused. Somebody can live one way and in a way that's very different from what they say they stand for. That is the human condition. That is the schism. That is the thing that we wrestle with. On the one hand, we aspire to be our best self, be people of integrity. On the other hand, we exhibit traits such as selfishness, or egocentricity, again, narcissism or grandiosity. And so we have to have a way of containing those things. Now, one of the things an example I gave in the first video was, how do you create a moral foundation in a child, for instance? One way to do it, an important way to do it, is when all of us as children, hopefully, when we stepped over the line and did something that was not part of our moral conditioning, our moral fabric, is that our parents, helped us see that. And let's say, for instance, a little kid, and I think this was the example I gave, the two little kids together, you know, engaging socially or what have you. One child takes a toy from the other child. The other child, the child whose toy was taken, is hurt and is crying. The other child who took the toy walks away and starts to entertain themselves with the toy. The parent sees this going on, and the parent would go over and talk to the child and say, did you take this toy from little Billy? Is this your toy? No, it isn't. That's little Billy's toy, isn't it? Well, we need to take this back to little Billy or what have you, and you need to apologize. And so the parent would take the young person, the child and the toy, to that other child and guide their child towards making an apology and giving it back. The child may not understand why that action was necessary, why that happened, but it begins to lay the groundwork and the neural framework for how to actually live out, if you will, a virtue. The important piece in that exchange is the apology. Now, as we grow older, it becomes even more effective, because when we have a moral foundation or framework in place and we step over the line, we should feel our conscience kick in and feel some remorse, some anxiety, and some guilt. The way we relieve ourselves of that is by restoring our integrity, by going and apologizing. This requires a person to get very, very close up to the fact that nobody's perfect. Can you see how that flies in the face of narcissism? Because a narcissist believes that they are perfect and they can't be told anything. They know everything, and everything they do is beyond debate. It's beyond question. It's beyond contestation. So therein lies the clash, right? Accountability and responsibility. So accountability is basically admitting what we did, and responsibility is the apology. Those two things, when done well, create humility. So humility is really the enemy of narcissism. Humility is the enemy of narcissism. And because of that, so is accountability and responsibility. So is apology. You see, all those things, apology, accountability, responsibility, humility, are signs of maturity. And yet they're also the enemy of narcissism, egocentricity, and grandiosity. Therein lies the clash. And now, at this time in history, we live, like I said, in such an inflated sense of entitlement and indulgence, fueled by narcissism, egocentricity, and grandiosity, that what you see on the other side, of course, is a lack of willingness to be accountable, to be responsible, to feel remorse, and a lack of humility. But it's that humility that allows us to move a value into a conviction. It's the humility is like the glue that fuses us to a virtue. And then we begin to embody it. That's why, as far as I can tell right now in society, we're starting to become very divisive and very polarized. And those different kind of camps that exist out there, they all think they're doing the right thing. They all think that they're have integrity. And yet what you see is there's no personal accountability, there's no personal responsibility, and there's no humility. It's all in their head. See, when we experience humility, we feel it's kind of like our ego gets deflated. But at the same time, we become more relational, more interested in unity, more relational. Like we're just so much easier to get along with. We're more open-minded. We don't have to debate everything. We're not always trying to get the last word. We don't always have to be right. This is maturity. That's what maturity looks like. But right now, we've got a lot of what appears to be, I wanted to say, highly educated individuals who know a lot, but none of it is embodied. And why is that? Because to embody it, to fuse with it, to become adhesed to it requires conviction. And conviction requires accountability, responsibility, and humility. It's always been that way since the beginning of time. That's why this is the road less traveled. That's why integrity is a jewel. It's a rare thing. And when we see it, we love it. And that's why we desire it for ourselves and for our own children. We desire it for everybody to be a person of integrity. But this is the path. And we live in a society right now, it seems to me, where people don't want to do the accountability and the responsibility and the humility piece. We live in the information age. People want to have knowledge and they want to hold it in their heads, but wisdom really is that movement from knowledge through the heart into the embodiment of it. And that's what's so missing. So I wanted to unpackage this a little bit further for you, help you understand that core psychological dynamic of narcissism, egocentricity, and grandiosity, what we call being infantile. And it's deeply embedded in all of us as human beings. And this is why we have to develop. This is why we have to mature. We have to move from an immature state to a mature state. This is why we need to be disciplined. This is why we need to enter into a discipline of truth our entire lives, because those deeply embedded constructs are there our entire lives. They need to be contained and they need to be tempered. That requires a moral foundation. And our virtues need to be embodied, eventually move out of our heads into an embodiment of it. And that requires accountability, responsibility, and humility. Humility is the glue. All right. So I hope this makes some sense. And again, just watch the other video too. These will fit together real nicely. And join us for the Parent Leadership Group every Tuesday from 6 to 8, where we continue to unpackage this stuff and talk about it as we all strive to be people of integrity. Take care. I'll see you soon.